A millionaire CEO rejects all the wealthy women vying for his attention, only to fall head over heels for a humble food delivery girl. Before we dive into the story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Sit back and enjoy. Daniel Stone was bored. Despite being at the most exclusive party in the city, an extravagant gathering filled with the wealthiest and most influential guests, he felt utterly detached. The grand ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers, laughter echoed across the polished marble floors, and elegant women draped in designer gowns fluttered around him like moths drawn to a flame. Yet, none of it impressed him. He had heard it all before. Talk of private islands, diamond-studded watches, and business deals worth millions. The same scripted conversations, the same empty words. He swirled the champagne in his glass, contemplating an excuse to slip away unnoticed. Then, an unexpected commotion shattered the evening's polished perfection. A sharp, startled scream rang out. "What the hell?" All eyes snapped toward the entrance. A gasp rippled through the crowd. A distinguished man, one of the city's most powerful bankers, stood frozen, his pristine white suit now drenched in deep crimson liquid. The stark contrast of the stain against the expensive fabric made it look almost like a scene from a crime drama. And right in front of him, clutching a takeout bag from Oriental Flavor Restaurant, stood a young woman. She looked utterly horrified, her wide eyes reflecting pure panic, as if she had just detonated a bomb by accident. "Oh my God! I'm so sorry, I didn't see you there," she stammered, frantically pulling napkins from her pocket and dabbing at his ruined suit. For a second there was silence. Then the room erupted into cruel laughter. "Who even let her in? She's probably never seen a suit up close before. What a complete disaster!" Layla felt her face flush with humiliation. She wanted to vanish, to sink into the floor and disappear. "I was just delivering an order," she tried to explain, her voice quivering. "The app must have sent me to the wrong address." The banker, still attempting to salvage his now ruined attire, let out an exasperated breath. "Get this girl out of here, now!" A security guard promptly stepped forward, seizing her arm with a firm grip. His voice was devoid of sympathy. "You don't belong here." Leela's pulse spiked. She tried to jerk her arm free, but he was too strong. "Wait, I was just making a delivery. I didn't mean to. This is a mistake." That's when a deep, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Let her go." The guard stiffened. The room went silent. All heads turned toward the source of the command. Daniel Stone. The billionaire CEO, who had remained indifferent to the night's opulence, suddenly stood at full attention, his sharp gaze locked on the scene before him. A ripple of shock swept through the guests. Even the banker, now seething with irritation, hesitated. Because when Daniel Stone spoke, people listened. "Daniel, don't tell me you're actually defending this girl?" The banker's voice was laced with disbelief, his face twisted in anger. Around the room, guests exchanged astonished glances, some whispering in hushed tones. No one, absolutely no one, had expected the city's most powerful CEO to step in for a mere delivery girl. But Daniel Stone didn't spare the outraged man even a glance. With an air of quiet authority, he stepped forward, his piercing gaze settling on Leela. Arms crossed, he studied her for a moment before speaking. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice even but firm. "And why are you here?" Layla's heart pounded. She was still struggling to grasp the absurdity of the moment. Daniel Stone, the Daniel Stone, was speaking to her. The same man who graced magazine covers, who was known for turning businesses into empires, was now standing before her waiting for an answer. She swallowed hard. I'm Layla," she managed. "I work at Oriental Flavor Restaurant. I do deliveries, but the app must have sent me to the wrong address." Daniel's brow furrowed slightly, as if something about her words had caught his interest. "Wait, is that the restaurant that delivers yakisoba?" Layla blinked in confusion. Yes? How do you know?" That's when Daniel did something completely unexpected. For the first time that evening, he smiled. "So you're the one who makes that amazing yakisoba?" Layla hesitated, taken aback. "Well, it's my grandmother's secret recipe," she admitted, scratching the back of her head. I just helped prepare it. Daniel rubbed his chin thoughtfully, as if turning an idea over in his mind. Then, with absolute certainty, he said, "That's perfect. I need a cook." Layla froze. The room erupted in a chorus of gasps. Glasses nearly slipped from fingers. The banker's eyes bulged in utter shock. "Daniel, you can't be serious." But Daniel remained completely unfazed. "I'll pay you 3 times what you make as a delivery driver." Layla nearly choked on her own breath. 3 times more? Yes. Her mind reeled. That was an unbelievable amount of money, more than she had ever imagined earning. But she couldn't just abandon her grandmother at the restaurant. They had been running Oriental flavor together for years. Her thoughts raced. If she was going to consider this, it had to be worth it. Taking a deep breath, she crossed her arms, steeling herself, and before she could stop herself, she blurted out, 5 times more! The room collectively sucked in a breath. Eyes widened in disbelief. A woman clutched her pearl necklace as if she might faint, and the banker, still dabbing hopelessly at his ruined white suit, looked like he might have a heart attack right then and there. Daniel Stone tilted his head, amusement flickering in his sharp gaze. "You're pretty demanding." Layla lifted her chin. "I have bills to pay." For a moment silence hung between them. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel chuckled, a rich, deep sound that sent another wave of stunned whispers through the crowd. 4 times. Layla didn't hesitate. 4.5. Daniel narrowed his eyes, intrigued. "Do you always negotiate like this?" She crossed her arms. "Only when I'm in trouble." The entire room was in a state of absolute shock. This girl, a delivery driver who had just been moments away from being thrown out, was now haggling over salary with Daniel Stone? The banker let out an exasperated huff. "Daniel, are you seriously hiring this girl?" But Daniel wasn't paying attention to anyone else. He was still watching Layla, as if assessing something about her. Then finally he smirked. "Deal." Layla's breath caught. "What?" "You start tomorrow." "But wait." Before she could process what had just happened, the room erupted into murmurs and disbelieving laughter. Some guests still looked scandalized. Others seemed entertained. The banker shook his head in sheer frustration. Layla glanced around, her mind spinning. She looked down at her stained apron, then up at the sea of wealthy, impeccably dressed people surrounding her. What just happened? She had come here for one reason, to deliver an order, yet somehow she had walked away with a brand new job. And the worst part? She was now working for an unpredictable, dangerously charming billionaire CEO. What could possibly go wrong? The next morning, Layla woke up, still half convinced that the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a bizarre dream. She stared at the ceiling, blinking away the last remnants of sleep. Did I really agree to work for a billionaire CEO? The thought alone was enough to make her groan. She ran a hand through her messy hair, trying to piece together everything that had led to this moment. Before she could dwell on it any longer, a warm, familiar voice called from the other side of the door. "Layla, dear, breakfast is ready." Layla took a deep breath, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and forced herself up. Whatever happened last night, it was real. And today she had to face it. In the small, cozy kitchen of Oriental Flavor restaurant, the scent of fried dough and spices filled the air. Her grandmother was already hard at work, expertly flipping golden brown spring rolls in a sizzling pan, preparing for the morning's first deliveries. The rhythmic sound of the spatula tapping against the wok was oddly soothing. Without turning around, the older woman spoke. "So, how was that big party?" Layla grabbed a cup of coffee and plopped down at the table, blowing on the steaming liquid. "Oh, it was great," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I caused a little disaster, spilled juice all over a banker, almost got thrown out, and well, now I work for Daniel Stone." Her grandmother froze mid-motion, spatula hovering in mid-air. "What?" Layla sighed, already anticipating the reaction. I know, it sounds completely insane, but he offered me 5 times what I make here and, well, I said yes, but only part-time." For a long moment, her grandmother didn't say a word. She simply went back to stirring the spring rolls, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "And do you trust this man?" Layla shrugged. "He eats our yakisoba every week. If he were dangerous, he would have kidnapped me by now." At that, the older woman let out a chuckle, shaking her head. "Well then, go ahead, but if he gives you trouble, let me know and I'll handle him." Leila grinned. "I'd love to see that." Draining the last of her coffee, she stood up, brushing non-existent crumbs off her shirt. "Wish me luck that I don't break anything on my first day." Her grandmother simply smiled. "Luck? Oh dear. I think you're going to need more than that." The Rockwell Industries building was even more intimidating up close. Towering glass panels reflected the early morning sun, making the entire structure gleam with an air of untouchable power. Leila hesitated at the entrance, gripping the strap of her bag a little tighter. The moment she stepped inside, a blast of ice-cold air from the AC sent a chill down her spine. The lobby was a whirlwind of movement. Dozens of impeccably dressed employees in sharp suits and designer heels rushed about, their voices blending into a hum of urgent phone calls and the rhythmic tapping of fingers against sleek tablets. She glanced down at herself, worn jeans, sneakers, and her apron stuffed into her bag. Fantastic. I definitely belong here. A well-dressed receptionist looked up from her computer, her expression unreadable. Can I help you?" Leila cleared her throat, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. I'm Leila, Daniel's new cook." For a second, the receptionist simply blinked, slowly, as if trying to decide whether this was some kind of elaborate prank. Then, after a brief but painfully awkward silence, she picked up the phone and dialed. "Mr. Stone, your new cook is here." Leila could barely make out a muffled response on the other end before the receptionist pointed toward the elevators. "Top floor." Leila exhaled sharply, steeling herself. "Here goes nothing." As the elevator doors closed around her, she felt her stomach twist with nerves. What the hell am I doing here? But all those thoughts vanished the moment the doors slid open. This wasn't just a kitchen. It was a masterpiece. Polished marble countertops gleamed under soft ambient lighting. Glass shelves stretched along the walls, stocked with the finest ingredients and cookware. A sprawling island sat at the center, pristine and untouched, like something straight out of a luxury magazine. And then there was Daniel, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with a lazy smirk. "Took you long enough?" Leila stepped forward, exhaling. "Got lost 3 times on the way, but I made it." He let out a low chuckle, then gestured toward the neatly arranged ingredients on the counter. "Good. Let's see if you actually know how to cook." Leila raised an eyebrow. "You didn't test that before hiring me?" "No." She blinked. "That sounds like a terrible business decision." Daniel tilted his head, amused. "It might be, but if it's awful, I'll just fire you and move on." Leila narrowed her eyes. "Was that a challenge?" "You can take it that way." Daniel's smirk remained firmly in place, his gaze steady and unwavering. Leila exhaled, rolling up her sleeves. "All right, let's see who comes out on top." With practiced ease, she grabbed the ingredients and got to work. The scent of sizzling vegetables filled the air as she prepared a simple yakisoba, the same way her grandmother had taught her since she was a child. But there was one problem. Daniel was watching her the entire time. She could feel his gaze, tracking her every movement, and it made her nerves prickle. "You're staring too much," she muttered, stirring the vegetables. "I'm studying the process." Leila scoffed. "I can't tell if I'm a cook or an animal at the zoo." He leaned against the counter, looking thoroughly amused. "Just making sure my food will be edible." She rolled her eyes and refocused, determined to prove him wrong, but then disaster struck. Caught up in their conversation, she wasn't paying attention and, without thinking, poured in way too much soy sauce. A thick, salty aroma filled the air. Her stomach dropped. "Oh no!" Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" Leila froze, trying to mask her panic. "Nothing." She stirred frantically, hoping to fix it before he noticed. Maybe if she diluted it quickly enough, he wouldn't. Too late. Daniel had already grabbed a plate, served himself a portion, and picked up a pair of chopsticks. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and then frowned. Leila held her breath. "Well?" Daniel looked at her, drawing out the silence, dragging the moment just long enough to make her sweat. Then, with a perfectly straight face, he asked, "Have you ever been to the ocean?" Leila blinked. "Yes." "Why?" Because this has about the same amount of salt, she groaned, burying her face in her hands. Great. First day, and I've already ruined everything. Daniel set his chopsticks down with a smirk. It's a rookie mistake, but honestly, still better than a lot of things I've eaten. Layla crossed her arms. So that means I passed the test? He let out a short laugh. Yes, but on one condition. Don't poison you. No promises. A short while later, as Layla wiped down the marble countertop, the kitchen door swung open without warning. A tall man in a sharp suit strode in, his expression as rigid as the lines of his perfectly pressed jacket. Mr. Stone, we need to talk. Daniel exhaled through his nose, already looking annoyed. Layla, finish up here and meet me in my office. She nodded, watching as the two men left, their hushed conversation trailing off down the hallway. Now alone, Leela leaned against the counter, staring after them. What the hell just happened? Less than 24 hours ago, she had been delivering takeout, minding her own business, living a completely normal life. Now, she was working in the kitchen of one of the most powerful businessmen in the city, negotiating salaries like she actually knew what she was doing. And somehow, she had the feeling this was only the beginning. Letting out a slow breath, she glanced around the kitchen. Spotless. A small, unexpected wave of pride washed over her. If someone had told her yesterday that she would be cooking in a billionaire's private office, she would have laughed in their face, but here she was. She dried her hands on her apron and made her way down the sleek, glass-lined hallway toward Daniel's office. As she approached, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. Inside, Daniel was leaning casually against his desk, arms crossed, while the suited man stood stiffly in front of him, his voice low and serious. This is not the time for distractions, Daniel. You need to stay focused on the merger with Sterling Group. You can't afford to waste time hiring street cooks. Layla's brows shot up. Street cook? Without hesitation, she pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. If I'm a street cook, then you're just an office executive. Same thing. The man turned sharply at the interruption, his expression flickering with surprise. And you are? Layla crossed her arms. Your boss's personal chef. Daniel hid a smirk, watching the exchange with obvious amusement. Layla, this is Paul, my financial advisor. Layla gave the suited man a once-overs, unimpressed. Paul, huh? Nice. Now maybe you can stop calling me a street cook. Paul scoffed, but didn't back down. He turned his attention back to Daniel. Are you really taking this seriously? Daniel leaned against his desk, completely at ease. Her food is better than any five-star restaurant in the city. Layla lifted her chin slightly. Paul let out a skeptical breath and crossed his arms. Fine. Then why don't you introduce your personal chef to your business partners? Let's see if she's really as good as you claim. Layla blinked. What? Daniel tilted his head, considering. You know, that's not a bad idea. Her eyes widened. Wait, what? Paul's lips curled into a smug smile. Tomorrow night, Daniel has a business dinner. Why don't you cook for the investors? If you're as talented as he says, they'll be impressed. Layla folded her arms. And if they're not? Paul shrugged. I still get paid either way. Without missing a beat, Layla shot back. He's got a point. Daniel chuckled, clearly enjoying himself. Paul narrowed his eyes. Then it's settled. Layla exhaled sharply, shaking her head. And do I get to choose the menu? Paul hesitated. Well, these dinners typically feature more sophisticated dishes, but Layla cut him off. I was hired because my food is good, not because I follow rules. Daniel glanced at Paul, the corner of his mouth twitching. Like that? Layla quipped, arching an eyebrow. Paul sighed, rubbing his temple as if already regretting this decision. Just don't make anyone sick. Layla grinned. No promises. The next morning, Layla arrived early at Rockwell Industries, hauling a large basket filled with fresh ingredients. She adjusted her grip and stepped inside the sleek, modern kitchen, setting everything down with a small huff. Daniel entered moments later, spotting the assortment of bags and raising an eyebrow. Are you planning to feed an army? Layla dusted off her hands. 6 investors, and you, so technically 7, but it's always better to have extra. Daniel reached into the basket, plucked out an apple and took a bite. "So, what's on the menu?" Layla leaned against the counter, a confident glint in her eyes. "Something simple, but unforgettable." Daniel smirked. "That sounds like you. We'll start with shrimp fritters, followed by special fried rice, sweet and sour beef, and yakisoba." Daniel stopped mid-bite, raising an eyebrow. "You're serving yakisoba to a table full of millionaires?" Leela straightened her posture. "They're going to love it." A low chuckle rumbled in Daniel's chest. "You're stubborn." Leela smirked. "And I'm good at what I do." Night fell, bringing with it the high-stakes business dinner. Inside the gleaming kitchen, Leela worked with quiet intensity, her hands moving swiftly as she plated the final touches on the dishes. The scent of sizzling garlic, seared beef, and warm spices filled the air. She barely noticed the distant murmur of conversation until the first guests arrived. Curious, she peeked through the glass panel on the door. A group of elegantly dressed men and women stood in the lavish dining area, exchanging polite yet measured words. Among them was Paul, his posture rigid with authority. When his gaze flickered toward the kitchen, he smirked, self-satisfied, almost daring her to fail. Layla rolled her eyes. A deep voice startled her. "Nervous?" She turned to find Daniel standing beside her, watching her with amusement. Layla arched an eyebrow. "Never," he chuckled. "We'll see." The dinner begins. One by one, the dishes made their way to the table. First, the golden shrimp fritters, perfectly crisp, their aroma irresistible. Then the fragrant fried rice, each grain infused with fresh herbs and a delicate smokiness. The sweet and sour beef followed, tender and glistening under the dimmed chandelier lights. Finally, the centerpiece arrived, steaming yakisoba. The noodles handmade, the vegetables sautéed to perfection, the sauce rich and balanced. At first, the guests remained composed, tasting the food with careful neutrality. Layla held her breath, her fingers unconsciously tightening around the edge of the counter. Then, it happened. A spark, subtle but undeniable, a flicker of approval in their eyes. A hushed murmur exchanged between two investors. Someone leaned forward, clearing their throat before addressing Daniel. "This is surprising." Another investor, a man who had barely spoken all evening, nodded in agreement. "I've never had yakisoba this good." Leela exhaled, the tension in her chest loosening. Across the room, she caught Paul's expression, his smug confidence replaced with tight-lipped disbelief. He looked as if he had just bitten into something impossibly sour. Daniel, meanwhile, simply leaned back in his chair, his eyes meeting Leela's from across the room. A knowing smile played on his lips. "I told you." Layla blinked, momentarily stunned. She hadn't just impressed them, she had won. And for the first time she realized that this job, this strange, unexpected turn in her life, might be far more interesting than she had ever imagined. The success of the business dinner still lingered in Layla's mind as she arrived for another day at Stone Enterprises. The investors' reactions had been a mix of astonishment and delight, proof that even the simplest dishes, when made with skill, could win over the most discerning palates. But as she stepped into the sleek corporate environment, she quickly realized something had changed. Whispers followed her down the hallway. "So this is the mysterious cook. How did someone like her get in here? I heard Mr. Stone is interested in her." Layla's eyes widened. Interested? What a ridiculous idea! She tightened her grip on the shopping bag in her hand and quickened her pace. She wasn't here to be the subject of office gossip. She was here to work. A strange sight. Pushing open the door to Daniel's private kitchen, she stopped short. The countertops were covered with takeout boxes. Not just any takeout, but gourmet dishes from some of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Exquisitely plated meals sat untouched on the sleek marble surface, their delicate presentation almost too perfect to disturb. And in the middle of it all, Daniel stood by the counter, holding a fork with the enthusiasm of someone being forced to eat gravel. Layla raised an eyebrow and set down her bag. "What's going on here?" Daniel exhaled, setting his fork down as if he had finally given up. "Paul insisted I try food from some of the city's best chefs, to refine my palate." Layla picked up one of the takeout lids and read the label, La Blanc. Oh yes, the place that charges $500 for a dish so small it looks like it belongs in a museum display? She glanced at the plates. Tiny portions, intricate designs, and just a hint of pretentiousness. "This doesn't look like food, it looks like modern art," Daniel chuckled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Finally, someone who agrees with me." Leela grabbed a fork and speared a piece of meat, elegantly decorated with edible gold leaf. She popped it into her mouth, chewed, then wrinkled her nose. "This tastes like seasoned cardboard?" Daniel let out a deep, amused laugh. "Exactly." She turned to him, then back to the untouched gourmet meals, narrowing her eyes. "You already had good food here, and you wasted all of this just to sample fancy dishes?" Daniel leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "Blame Paul, he thinks I need to develop refined taste." Layla scoffed and started unpacking the ingredients she had brought. "Well, if it's refined taste he wants, I'll show him what real food is." A battle of flavors. Daniel watched as she moved with practiced ease, slicing ingredients, stirring sauces, and tossing fresh chicken into a sizzling pan. The rich aroma of garlic, soy, and warm spices filled the kitchen, replacing the sterile scent of overpriced delicacies. He smirked. "You're cooking just to prove a point, aren't you?" Layla shot him a grin. "Always." Minutes later, she set a steaming bowl of golden fried rice in front of him. The grains were perfectly separated, the sauce glossy and fragrant, the chicken glistening under the light. Daniel didn't hesitate. He picked up his chopsticks and took a bite. His eyes closed briefly as he chewed, savoring the burst of flavors. Then, he let out a quiet sigh. "This is good." Layla crossed her arms, waiting. "Better than the expensive dish?" Daniel opened his eyes and gave her a slow, teasing smile. "No comparison," she smirked, victory already hers, until the kitchen door swung open and unwelcome guest. A blonde woman strode in, her tailored suit impeccable, her heels clicking against the floor like a declaration of authority. "Daniel, darling, I've been looking for you." Her voice dripped with effortless charm, but as soon as her gaze landed on Layla, her expression cooled. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "And who is this?" Daniel, still eating, didn't even bother looking up. "Layla, my personal chef." And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. Layla tilted her head, already sensing that whoever this woman was, she wasn't used to being ignored, and from the way Daniel kept eating as if he didn't have a care in the world, he was enjoying this far more than he should. The blonde woman let out a theatrical laugh, tilting her head just slightly, as if she had misheard. "A chef? Since when do you need a chef, Daniel?" Layla didn't miss the way she looked at her, that subtle, practiced glance, the kind that assessed whether someone belonged in a room or was simply passing through. She met the woman's gaze head-on and smiled. "Well, now he does." The blonde's expression faltered for half a second, clearly caught off guard by Layla's boldness. Daniel sighed and set his chopsticks down, already looking exhausted. "Layla, this is Celeste." Layla arched a brow. "Your ex-girlfriend?" Celeste let out another carefully measured laugh. "Oh dear, I'm still very much a part of Daniel's life." Layla narrowed her eyes slightly. "Lucky you," Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Celeste, what do you want?" She placed a manicured hand on his shoulder, leaning in ever so slightly. "Dinner tonight at LeBlanc, again?" Daniel didn't even hesitate. "I have a meeting." Celeste's smile didn't waver. "Then tomorrow." This time, Daniel glanced at Layla before looking back at Celeste, and when he spoke, his voice was firm but effortless. "I have my own chef now. I don't need to go out to eat." Celeste's smile flickered for just a moment, so brief it was almost imperceptible, but then, just as quickly she recovered, smoothing a hand down the front of her tailored jacket. "Well, I hope your new chef is very talented, darling, because I doubt anything can top dinner at LeBlanc." Layla leaned casually against the counter. "If you'd like, I can prepare something special for you." Celeste's gaze flicked over her, slow and dismissive. "Oh dear, I doubt you're capable of that." Layla smiled sweetly. "There's only one way to find out." For the first time, Celeste's perfectly curated composure cracked. She turned back to Daniel with a sharp look, but he merely sat there, expression unreadable. "See you later, Daniel," she said, her tone light but her posture stiff. And with that, she strode out of the kitchen, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and unspoken challenge. Layla turned to Daniel. "Has she always been like this?" Daniel exhaled, reaching for his drink. Worse? Then good luck. Daniel chuckled, picking up his chopsticks again. Thanks. I'll need it. Layla took a slow sip of her juice, leaning against the counter as she watched him finish his meal. She still couldn't quite figure him out. A billionaire, surrounded by opportunists, living in a world so far removed from hers that it might as well have been another universe, and yet somehow he seemed normal. That was the problem. Because the more normal he appeared, the more dangerous this situation became. It was easy to keep her guard up around the arrogant, untouchable CEO she had imagined him to be. But this? The man sitting across from her, casually eating the food she made, laughing at her jokes, and ignoring his ex-girlfriend's attempts to drag him back into her world? This was different. This was the kind of thing that led to blurred lines. Layla straightened, forcing herself to look away. This is just a job, she reminded herself, or at least, that's what she kept telling herself. The next morning, Sophia stepped into Daniel's office with an unusual sense of ease. In just a few days, she had adapted to the odd routine of cooking for an eccentric billionaire and enduring the wary glances of his staff. What she hadn't expected was to walk in on a full-blown argument. Before breakfast, no less? This is absurd, Daniel, Paul's voice rang out as he slammed a hand on the desk. Daniel, unfazed, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, amusement flickering in his eyes. I think it sounds like a challenge. Sophia paused in the doorway, adjusting the bag of fresh ingredients in her arms. Am I interrupting some high-stakes corporate drama, or is this about something actually important? Paul exhaled sharply, dragging a hand over his face. Tell him this idea is ridiculous. Sophia arched a brow and looked at Daniel. Okay, what did you do now? Without a word, he gestured to an open newspaper on his desk. The bold headline announced an upcoming charity food event featuring the city's most renowned chefs. Paul thinks I have no shot at winning this competition, Daniel said, his signature half-smile appearing. Sophia blinked. Wait, you want to compete? Why not? He replied easily. Paul groaned. Because you're a CEO, not a chef. Sophia crossed her arms, giving Daniel a scrutinizing look. Be honest, can you even cook an egg? Daniel tilted his head in thought. I made instant noodles once. Paul threw his hands up in frustration. Thank you. He doesn't stand a chance. Sophia bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. Well, in that case, I'd say he needs a very patient teacher. Daniel's gaze met hers. Are you offering? She shrugged. As long as you promise not to burn the kitchen down. The next few days were absolute chaos. Sophia quickly realized that Daniel Stone, the man trusted with billions in investments, was a complete and utter disaster in the kitchen. His first attempt at cooking a steak nearly ended in flames. Why is there so much smoke? He coughed, waving a hand in the air. Sophia rushed over, eyes wide. Because you cranked the heat up to max. Are you trying to burn the place down? She grabbed the pan before it turned into an actual fire hazard. His second attempt wasn't any better. This time he tried chopping onions and somehow managed to cut his own finger. Ouch, Sophia groaned, grabbing his hand. My God, you're a danger to yourself. By lesson 3, she decided to simplify things. Surely he could manage a sandwich. She was wrong. Daniel, you cannot use half a jar of mayonnaise. He frowned, utterly unbothered. But I like mayonnaise. Paul, who occasionally dropped in to monitor the progress, always left shaking his head. This is going to be a disaster. Sophia, however, refused to give up. He was a mess now, but she was determined to turn things around. Daniel studied her for a moment, then smirked. You really think I can get better? She mirrored his smirk. Not at all. But I do love a challenge. Finally, the day of the event arrived. The grand hall buzzed with anticipation, packed with renowned chefs, influential business moguls, and a swarm of press eager to document every moment. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and the judges sat poised, ready to taste and critique. Daniel stood among the competitors wearing a spotless apron. Despite his inexperience, he exuded a quiet confidence that surprised even Sophia. She lingered behind the scenes, torn between apprehension and pride. Then, the competition began. Each participant had 1 hour to create an original dish. The moment the timer started, Daniel moved with newfound determination, gathering his ingredients and setting to work. Sophia held her breath. Was he still a disaster in the kitchen? Absolutely. But over the past few days, he had improved, more than anyone had expected. She watched closely. He chopped vegetables, not fast, but at least without slicing his fingers. He prepared the sauce, focused, precise, no unnecessary waste. And when it came time to plate, he arranged everything with an almost meticulous care. Most importantly, he resisted the urge to drown the dish in mayonnaise. When the timer buzzed, the dishes were presented. Sophia's hands curled into fists as she waited. One by one, the judges sampled each plate, murmuring among themselves. Then they reached Daniel's dish. A heavy silence settled over the room as the first judge took a bite. Then the second, the third. Sophia's heart pounded. Finally, one of the judges set down his fork and dabbed his mouth with a napkin. He looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Stone, I must admit, the suspense was nearly unbearable. But this?" He leaned back, impressed. "This is shockingly good." Sophia exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. From across the room, Paul's jaw nearly hit the floor. "But how?" The second judge nodded in agreement. "The balance of flavors, the texture, it's unexpectedly refined." Daniel allowed himself a small, knowing smile. He met Sophia's gaze, and she responded with a simple thumbs up. When the final results were announced, Daniel didn't win. But he placed second. And for a billionaire CEO who could barely cook a week ago, that was more than just a victory. As the event wrapped up and the last of the guests filtered out, Daniel approached Sophia with a satisfied smile. "So, teacher, did I do a good job?" Sophia tilted her head, pretending to consider. "I'd say you passed with flying colors." Daniel chuckled, stepping closer. "Good, because there's something I've been meaning to ask." She crossed her arms. "And what would that be?" He hesitated for just a second, then tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. "How about we open a restaurant together?" Sophia blinked. "What?" His smile deepened. "I'm serious. Your food is incredible, and honestly, I'm starting to enjoy this." She studied him carefully, trying to decide if he was joking, but there was no hint of amusement in his expression, just that same spark of determination she had seen in him throughout the competition. And in that moment, Sophia realized something. Naomi, this wasn't just the end of a challenge. Naomi, it was the beginning of something much bigger. After the cooking event, Sophia expected her life to return to normal. But ever since Daniel had casually suggested opening a restaurant together, her mind wouldn't stop racing. A business partner with a billionaire? It sounded absurd. Yet when she arrived at the office that morning, she realized something. Daniel wasn't joking. Right in the middle of the massive conference table sat a thick stack of documents. "Good morning, cooking teacher," Daniel greeted, a sly smile playing on his lips. Sophia eyed the papers warily. "What's this?" Daniel crossed his arms. "Potential locations for the restaurant." She blinked. "Wait, you're actually serious about this?" He pulled out a chair, tapping the documents lightly. "Not only am I serious, but I've already started scouting the best spots." Sophia let out a disbelieving laugh. "Daniel, this is crazy. I'm just a cook who learned everything from my grandmother." He shrugged. "And I'm just a billionaire who nearly burned down his kitchen trying to fry a steak. Seems like a good balance to me." She shook her head. "You really have no idea what you're getting into, do you?" His grin widened. "I just know that every great investment starts with a solid plan, and I have one." Sophia sighed, finally pulling out a chair and sitting beside him. "Okay, suppose I humor this crazy idea. Where exactly do you plan to open this restaurant?" Daniel flipped open one of the documents, pointing at a neatly highlighted list of locations. "I have 3 options. One downtown, another in an upscale neighborhood, and a third near your village." Sophia froze. "Near my village?" He nodded. "I figured it would be a great way to support your community, and, honestly, authentic homemade food has its own market." Her eyes narrowed. "Was this your idea or Paul's?" Daniel chuckled. "Mine. Paul thinks it's a mistake to invest outside the commercial district, but I disagree." Sophia bit her lip, considering. Is this really happening?" 100%. She fell silent, Sorting through the flood of thoughts racing through her mind, it was an incredible opportunity, but also a massive risk. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "What's holding you back?" Sophia sighed. "My grandmother. I don't want to leave her alone at the restaurant." Daniel tilted his head. "Then bring her to the new one." Her eyes widened. "You make it sound so simple." He smirked. "Isn't it? She's a great cook. So are you. It could be a family business." Sophia was speechless. Daniel leaned back, arms crossed, watching her carefully. "Come on, Sophia, what do you have to lose?" She exhaled slowly, heart pounding. "Fine, but I want half the decision-making power over the restaurant." "Deal." "Outrageous prices. I wanted it to be affordable for everyone." Daniel raised an amused eyebrow. "You really know how to negotiate." Layla smirked. "I learned from the best." The moment Sophia left the office, she rushed home, her heart pounding with excitement. She needed to tell her grandmother. When she stepped into the small kitchen of Sabotage Oriental, the familiar scent of spices wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Her grandmother stood by the counter, calmly folding aprons, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath Sophia's feet. "Grandma, you won't believe this." The elderly woman looked up, her kind eyes twinkling. "What is it, Sophia?" Sophia pulled out a chair and sat down, barely able to contain her excitement. "Daniel wants to open a restaurant with me." Her grandmother blinked, momentarily surprised. "With you? Yes, and he wants to open it near the village." The old woman smiled softly and resumed folding the aprons as if processing the news at her own pace. "And do you want this?" Sophia hesitated, the question settling heavily in her chest. I think so. But only if you come with me." Her grandmother chuckled, shaking her head. "My dear, I'm too old to start over in a new restaurant." Sophia's heart clenched. "But I need you. This place exists because of you." The old woman took her hands, squeezing them gently. "I'll always be here for you, Sophia. But it's time for you to build your own story." Sophia felt a lump in her throat. For so long she had leaned on her grandmother's wisdom, her presence, her cooking. But now, standing at the edge of something new, she realized, maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stand on her own. In the days that followed, Daniel and Sophia threw themselves into the restaurant project. The discussions were intense. "I want affordable dishes," Sophia insisted. "But without compromising quality," Daniel countered. Every detail was up for debate. From the restaurant's name to the menu. "How about taste of home?" Daniel suggested. Sophia wrinkled her nose. "Too generic." "And what do you suggest?" She paused, then smiled. "Flavors of the village." Daniel considered it, then nodded. "I like that." Slowly, the vision for the restaurant started taking shape. Contracts were drawn up, final decisions were made, and everything seemed to be moving forward. But on the eve of signing the lease, something unexpected happened. Sophia got a visitor. Celeste. She appeared at the entrance of Sabotage Oriental, wearing her usual sly smile. "We need to talk." Sophia crossed her arms. "I don't have anything to say to you." Celeste stepped inside uninvited, glancing around the small restaurant with barely concealed disdain. "So this is where you worked. Makes sense." Sophia exhaled sharply. "What do you want, Celeste?" The blonde took a step closer, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I just wanted to warn you to be careful." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "Careful with what?" Celeste sighed dramatically, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You might think Daniel is being generous, but men like him don't do anything without a hidden agenda." Sophia clenched her fists. "And what exactly are you implying?" Celeste gave a knowing smile. "I'm just saying that when he gets tired of this little game, he'll toss you aside." Sophia's blood boiled. "Funny, because it looks like he got tired of you first." Celeste's smile faltered as her cheeks flushed red. She recovered quickly, tossing her hair back. "We'll see how long you last, sweetheart." And with that, she walked out. Sophia stood frozen, a strange tightness forming in her chest. She didn't want to believe a single word Celeste had said, but what if she was right? Daniel was a billionaire, she was just a simple cook. What if all of this was just a passing fancy for him? The next day, Sophia strode into Daniel's office, determination burning in her chest. She needed to talk to him. She needed to ask the question that had been haunting her since Celeste's visit. But before she could say a single word, Daniel was already pressing his pen to paper, his signature gliding across the contract. He looked up and smiled. Done. We're officially partners now. Sophia swallowed hard. No turning back. No second guessing. This would either be the best decision of her life or the biggest mistake she'd ever make. After signing the contract, Sophia found herself in the most surreal situation of her life, officially a business partner with a billionaire. And as absurd as it seemed, she had a restaurant to open, but that didn't mean it would be easy. Far from it. Daniel, with all his business expertise, wanted everything to be flawless. We need a strong visual identity, he said, scrolling through logo designs on his screen. Across from him, Sophia buried her face in her hands. Daniel. Something sophisticated yet inviting, modern but with a rustic charm, Sophia sighed. Daniel. He finally looked up. What? She crossed her arms. This is a restaurant, not a tech company. Daniel tilted his head. Branding is important. Sophia rolled her eyes. More important than the food? His lips quirked into a sideways smile. Okay, let's focus on the food, she exhaled in relief. Only for Paul to walk in, a thick stack of papers in his hands. We've got a problem, Sophia squeezed her eyes shut. Of course we do. Daniel took the papers, scanning them. What happened now? Paul sighed. The property needs urgent repairs. Paul hesitated. Electrical issues, plumbing problems, and let's just say a family of pigeons was living in the kitchen. Sophia pressed her hands to her head. This cannot be happening. Daniel flipped through the report, unfazed. We can fix this. It'll set us back a bit, but nothing impossible. Paul crossed his arms. It's going to be expensive. Sophia narrowed her eyes. How expensive? Paul hesitated. Daniel, however, didn't even flinch. Don't worry about it. Sophia slammed her palm on the table. Don't worry, she glared at him. This isn't just your money, Daniel. I'm your partner. I need to know. He studied her for a moment, then grabbed a pen and scribbled a number on a piece of paper, sliding it across the table. Sophia looked at the number and nearly fell off her chair. Are you out of your mind? Daniel shrugged. It's a necessary investment. Sophia groaned, dragging a hand down her face. Daniel, with that money I could buy half the town. Paul, clearly enjoying the scene, just leaned back in his chair. Sophia took a slow, steadying breath. What if we found another location? Daniel shook his head. This is the right place. He met her gaze, serious now. Do you trust me? Sophia froze. The way he asked it, so direct, so certain, it made her chest tighten. She exhaled sharply. Fine, but if this restaurant goes bankrupt, I'm haunting you forever. Daniel chuckled. Fair enough. In the following days, the restaurant was transformed into a full-blown construction site. Dust filled the air. The scent of fresh paint lingered, and the sound of drills and hammers became a constant backdrop to Sophia was everywhere, checking measurements, picking finishes, making sure no detail was overlooked. And Daniel? Well, he tried to help. Daniel, no, that paint is for the walls, not the counter. He studied the brush in his hand, tilting his head. Are you sure? I think it would give it a modern touch. From a safe distance, Paul sipped his coffee, clearly entertained. You know, I really should bring a camera to record this. Daniel shot him a glare, then casually flung a paintbrush in his direction. Paul dodged it with a smirk. And so the days passed, filled with chaotic mishaps, long hours, and endless decisions. Until, finally, the restaurant took shape. The dust settled. The last piece of furniture was placed. The air smelled less like paint and more like possibility. When Sophia stepped inside the finished space for the first time, she felt her breath hitch. It was real. Her fingers trailed over the polished counters, the warm wood accents, the soft lighting that made the place feel like home. She turned to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. This is amazing. He watched her, a slow smile forming. And this is just the beginning. The next challenge? Building the team for Sophia? The choice was obvious. She wanted people from her village, those who truly understood the soul of homemade cooking. Daniel, however, had a different vision. Layla, we need a renowned chef. She folded her arms. Why? I have experience, someone with professional qualifications. Sophia let out a sharp laugh. Oh sure, because a diploma can teach what my grandmother has perfected over 50 years? Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. That's not what I meant. Then let me build my own team. He studied her for a moment, then raised an eyebrow. You're that confident? She smirked. I'll prove I'm right. And with that she set out to recruit her staff. Sophia went straight to the heart of her village, where flavors weren't just ingredients, they were tradition. Mr. Pedro, do you still make that amazing bean stew? Mrs. Rosa, looking for a new job? You remember when you dreamed of being a baker? I have a proposal. One by one she gathered her team, not professionals on paper, but people whose hands carried generations of culinary wisdom. A few days later, Daniel stood before the assembled group. They shifted awkwardly, eyeing him like they couldn't quite figure out how a billionaire and a village cook had become business partners. Sophia tapped his shoulder, a teasing glint in her eyes. I bet you've never worked with such good people. Daniel glanced at the eager, determined faces before him. Slowly, a smile tugged at his lips. We'll see if they can handle it. Opening day arrived faster than Sophia expected. Word had spread like wildfire. The entire town seemed to know about the new restaurant. Journalists crowded outside, cameras flashing, ready to capture the grand debut. A long line of eager customers stretched down the street, buzzing with anticipation. And Sophia? She was on the verge of a meltdown. The sauce isn't right, the rice is burned, who put sugar in the soy sauce? Daniel strode into the kitchen, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. What's going on? Sophia ran a shaky hand over her forehead. Chaos. That's what's going on. He chuckled. Breathe. Everything's under control. She shot him a glare. How can you be so calm? Daniel stepped closer, gently gripping her shoulders. Because you're the best cook I know. For a brief moment, Sophia forgot everything, the pressure, the stress, the noise outside. All she saw was the unwavering confidence in his eyes. And then, first order, ready! Just like that, the restaurant was officially open. The kitchen buzzed with energy, dishes flying out to eager customers. Laughter and chatter filled the dining area. One by one, the compliments poured in. The flavors, the warmth, the heart behind every dish, it all shone through. Sophia could hardly believe it. Across the room, Daniel watched it all unfold, arms folded, a satisfied smirk on his face. Paul sauntered over, giving him a knowing look. You really took a big gamble on this. Daniel's gaze stayed on Sophia, on the way she moved between tables, laughing, glowing. He smiled faintly. And it paid off. Paul followed his gaze, smirking. And it's not just about the restaurant, is it? Daniel exhaled, tearing his eyes away. I don't know what you're talking about. Paul chuckled. Of course you don't. Hours later, the last customer left and the restaurant doors finally closed. Sophia slumped into a chair, utterly drained. Every muscle in her body ached, but beneath the exhaustion was something else. Something that felt a lot like pride. Daniel dropped into the seat beside her, his expression amused. Did you survive? She let out a long sigh. Barely, he chuckled. But you did it. Sophia turned to him. The excitement, the chaos, the overwhelming rush, it had all led to this moment. And as she sat there, taking it all in, a realization settled deep in her chest. Her life would never be the same again. The restaurant was officially up and running. To Sophia's surprise, it wasn't just a success. It was a sensation. Every day the line stretched around the corner. Orders poured in non-stop. Customers left with satisfied smiles, spreading the word even further. But there was one small problem. She no longer had a life. I'm dying. Layla collapsed into a chair in the back of the kitchen, her body aching from exhaustion. Her hair was a mess, her apron stained beyond recognition, and her eyelids felt like they weighed a ton. Across from her, Daniel sat comfortably, sipping coffee as if he hadn't a care in the world. He glanced at her and smirked. You wanted this, remember? She lifted her head just enough to glare at him. I wanted a restaurant. I didn't want to become a zombie. Daniel raised an eyebrow. The solution is simple. What? Hire more people. Sophia blinked. What? He leaned back, completely at ease, already taken care of. Before she could question him, the kitchen doors swung open and 3 new employees walked in. Sophia shot up from her chair. Who are you? Daniel took another leisurely sip of coffee. Our new team. Her eyes narrowed. "You hired people without telling me." He gave her an infuriatingly smug smile. "Consider it a gift." Hands on her hips, she huffed. "Daniel, I'm your business partner. You can't make decisions on your own." He shrugged. "You were overworked. I fixed the problem." Sophia opened her mouth to argue, but damn it, he had a point. She exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. "Fine, you win this one." Daniel's grin widened. "As always." She rolled her eyes. "Don't get used to it." With a stronger team in place, the restaurant became more efficient than ever, but with success came an unexpected challenge. Fame. Fame. What had once been a humble eatery was now a hotspot. Influencers flocked in, snapping pictures of their plates. Celebrities posted about their dining experiences. Food critics wrote glowing reviews. And before Sophia knew it, she wasn't just running a restaurant, she had become the face of it. "I didn't ask for this," she groaned, staring at her phone in disbelief. Daniel, as always, looked thoroughly entertained. "What happened now?" She turned the screen toward him, her eyes wide with panic. "This video has over 1 million views." Daniel leaned in, smirking. "Congratulations." Sophia threw her hands up. "It's not funny. I'm just a cook." He crossed his arms. "And now you're a famous cook." She exhaled sharply, pressing her fingers to her temples. "I just wanted to make food, not become some kind of celebrity." Daniel chuckled, taking the phone from her hand and glancing at the screen. "You know what? This is a good thing." She shot him a skeptical look. "How exactly is this a good thing?" He met her gaze, his voice softer this time. "Because it means people love what you do." Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but then paused. Because, deep down, she knew he was right. With the restaurant thriving, everything finally seemed to be falling into place. Until the day Celeste came back. She strutted through the entrance like she owned the place, sunglasses perched on her nose, high heels clicking against the floor. "Good morning, darlings," she announced, her voice dripping with amusement. Sophia felt her stomach twist. Behind the counter, Daniel's expression darkened. "What do you want, Celeste?" She flashed a dazzling smile. "Just stopping by to see how my favorite power duo is handling all this success." Sophia crossed her arms. "You never show up without a reason." Celeste sighed dramatically, then reached into her designer purse, pulling out an elegant gold-foiled invitation. "Since you mentioned it," she slid it onto the counter. "I'm organizing a special event and would love for you to handle the catering." Sophia blinked. "What?" Celeste tilted her head. "I know we've had our differences, but business is business, right?" Sophia turned to Daniel. He was already eyeing Celeste with suspicion. "And what kind of event would this be?" he asked, voice unreadable. "A charity dinner. Plenty of important people will be there. It'd be a great opportunity for you." Sophia hesitated. It wasn't a bad idea. In fact, it could be huge for the restaurant. But trusting Celeste, that was a different story. She looked at Daniel. "What do you think?" He exhaled sharply. "I think trusting her is a mistake." Celeste rolled her eyes. "For God's sake, Daniel, I'm offering you a golden opportunity." Sophia hesitated a beat longer, then made her decision. "Okay, we'll do the catering." Celeste's smile widened, victory gleaming in her eyes. "Perfect." Daniel folded his arms. "If you try anything, relax, darling," she smirked. "It's going to be a success." With that, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks to an unspoken threat. Daniel turned to Sophia, his jaw tight. "Are you sure about this?" She took a deep breath. "I know she has an agenda, but if this helps the restaurant grow, it's worth the risk." Daniel sighed, watching her carefully. "You're braver than I thought." Sophia smirked. "And you haven't seen anything yet." In the days leading up to Celeste's event, Sophia and her team worked tirelessly to perfect every dish, but something felt off. On the day of the event, as they arrived to set up, Sophia noticed the tension in the air. The waiters avoided her gaze. The organizers whispered among themselves, looking uneasy. And then, Daniel's phone rang. He answered, and almost instantly the color drained from his face. "What?" Sophia's stomach clenched. "What's going on?" Daniel locked eyes with her, fury darkening his expression. "Celeste set us up." Her heart pounded. "What do you mean?" He took a sharp breath. She told the guests that our food was made by a different chef, a competitor. Sophia froze. What? She's using our work but taking all the credit for someone else. Heat flared through Sophia's veins. That's snake. Daniel turned to the staff. Stop serving right now. But Sophia shook her head, her jaw tightening. No. I'm handling this myself. Before anyone could stop her, she marched straight to the stage, grabbed the microphone and let her voice ring through the room. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the dinner. I just want to clear something up. From across the room, Celeste went pale. All of this food? It was made by my team at Sabotage. Every dish, every flavor. You're tasting our work. A murmur spread through the crowd as guests exchanged surprised glances. Celeste shot up from her seat. This is a mistake. But Sophia didn't let her finish. If anyone has doubts, come to the kitchen. I'll cook a dish right here in front of everyone. Silence. Then, applause. The crowd erupted in cheers, nodding in approval. Celeste's face burned with humiliation. And Daniel? He simply smirked, arms crossed. This girl is amazing. That night, as Sophia and Daniel walked out, they knew they had won. Celeste had tried to humiliate them, but in the end, she was the one left in disgrace. And for the first time, Sophia realized she and Daniel made a great team. The restaurant's fame was soaring. After Celeste's disastrous attempt at sabotage, Sabotage became the talk of the town. Newspapers covered the drama, social media buzzed with praise, and customers flocked to the restaurant eager to try the food that had caused such a stir. And now, Sophia couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Hey, it's the chef from Sabotage, a woman called out in the market, pointing excitedly. You have to teach me that recipe, another customer begged, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. Sophia, balancing a bag full of ingredients, forced a polite smile and made a beeline for the exit. Beside her, Daniel strolled at a leisurely pace, hands in his pockets, clearly amused. You're becoming a celebrity, Sophia groaned, dropping a tomato into her bag. I didn't sign up for this, Daniel smirked. Too late now. She shot him a glare. This is your fault. He raised an eyebrow. Mine? She jabbed a finger at his chest. You dragged me into this world of rich people, and now I'm stuck here. Daniel chuckled. Did I drag you, or did you walk in willingly? Sophia opened her mouth to argue, then shut it, because deep down, he wasn't wrong. With the restaurant booming, Daniel decided it was time to raise the stakes. I want you to cook for a special dinner. Sophia narrowed her eyes. Define special. His lips curled into a knowing smile. A business dinner. Just a few select guests. She blinked. So, more rich people? Basically. Sophia let out a dramatic sigh. I don't know if my heart can handle this. Daniel chuckled, completely unfazed. You'll be fine. The dinner was set on the top floor of a luxury hotel, where the city skyline glittered beyond the glass walls. Sophia stepped inside, arms full of ingredients, and immediately felt like an outsider. The polished floors, the soft hum of refined conversation. It was a world she didn't belong to. I have no business being here, she muttered under her breath. But the moment she entered the kitchen, everything changed. The clatter of pans, the scent of fresh herbs, the steady rhythm of chopping, this was where she belonged. Here, she wasn't out of place. Here, she was home. Meanwhile, in the dining area, Daniel played his part effortlessly, entertaining the city's elite. The businessmen, swirling their wine, discussed Sabotage's meteoric rise. You found a diamond in the rough, Daniel, one remarked, raising his glass. That girl has serious talent, another added. Daniel leaned back, a knowing smile on his lips. I know. Then, the first dish arrived. As the waiters placed the plates before the guests, a hush fell over the table. Silverware clinked against porcelain. Tasting turned into silence. Silence turned into awe. Finally, an older man with silver-streaked hair set down his fork. This, he said, voice rich with approval, is extraordinary. Nods followed, murmurs of agreement across the room. Watching from a quiet corner, Sophia felt something bloom in her chest. She did it. However, not everything went as planned. When Sophia stepped back into the kitchen, her heart stopped cold. A waiter stood by the stove, gripping a suspicious bottle, its contents poised to spill into the simmering sauce. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded. The man's eyes widened in panic. In a split second, he spun on his heel and bolted for the exit. "Hey, come back here!" Sophia shouted, racing after him. But by the time she reached the hallway, he was gone. Her breath was unsteady as she turned back to the bottle, fingers trembling as she examined it. Something wasn't right. One had tried to sabotage the dinner. Without hesitation, she strode out of the kitchen, searching for Daniel. She found him near the dining area, mid-conversation with a group of investors. "We need to talk. Now." The urgency in her voice made him turn instantly. His expression shifted, serious, sharp. He pulled her aside. "What happened?" Sophia handed him the bottle. "Someone tried to put this in the sauce." Daniel's grip tightened as his gaze darkened. "Who?" She shook her head. "I didn't see clearly. He ran the moment I caught him." For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He simply stared at the bottle, his jaw clenched, his posture rigid. And then, for the first time, Sophia saw something different in his eyes. Not frustration, not amusement, rage. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried a sharp edge. "I'll take care of it." The dinner ended in success, but Daniel's mind was far from at ease. Someone had tried to sabotage them, and he intended to find out who. Meanwhile, Sophia could barely keep her eyes open. She slumped into a chair, letting out a long sigh. "I just want to sleep for a week." Daniel studied her for a moment, and before he could think twice, his hand instinctively covered hers. "You did a great job today." Sophia's breath hitched. A soft blush crept onto her cheeks. "Thank you." Daniel's lips curved into a knowing smile. "And now, I think we deserve a break." She let out a tired laugh. "Finally, something sensible coming from you." He chuckled, but the thought lingered in his mind. This wasn't over, not yet. The next morning arrived with a strange, almost electric tension in the air. Sophia stepped into the restaurant early, but the weight of the previous night's events still pressed heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't shake the thought someone had tried to sabotage them. And the worst part? What if she hadn't caught it in time? One ruined dinner, one scandal, and everything she and Daniel had built, gone. This can't happen again. Determined, she strode into the kitchen, rolling up her sleeves, ready to throw herself into work. But before she could, Daniel appeared. "We need to talk." Sophia exhaled sharply. "If this is about last night's dinner, I already have a headache." Daniel crossed his arms. "I know, but this is bigger than that." Sophia frowned. "What do you mean?" Without a word, he pulled his phone from his pocket and turned the screen toward her. Sophia's stomach dropped. A headline glared back at her in bold letters. "Successful restaurant owner caught in fraud scandal. Rumors suggest head chef is nothing but a fake." And right there, beneath the words, was her face. Sophia's breath hitched. "What the hell? Who wrote this?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm looking into it. But one thing's clear. Someone wants to bring us down. First a sabotage attempt, now a public smear campaign." Sophia clenched her fists. "This is insane. I work harder in this restaurant than anyone. How can they call me a fraud?" Daniel let out a slow breath. "I'll handle it." She narrowed her eyes. "How exactly?" A dangerous gleam flickered in his expression. "By giving them exactly what they want." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Are you insane?" Daniel smirked. "Trust me." She crossed her arms. "Fine. But if this plan fails, you're washing dishes for a month." Daniel grinned. "Deal." In the days that followed, Daniel did the unthinkable. He announced a live cooking event, an open invitation for anyone to come and watch Sophia cook in real time. Sophia's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" Daniel simply nodded. "If they want to question your skills, let's show them how wrong they are." Sophia bit her lip. "This could go really, really wrong," Daniel smirked. "Or it could go really, really right." When the day arrived, the restaurant was packed. Journalists, influencers, loyal customers, curious skeptics, all of them were there, watching, waiting, wondering if the rumors were true. Was Sophia a fraud or a true master of her craft? She felt the weight of their stares, the pressure pressing down on her chest. What if she messed up? What if she failed? But then, Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Just do what you always do. She met his eyes, steady, confident, unshaken. With a deep breath, she stepped into the kitchen, and then she worked magic. She moved with effortless precision, her hands a blur as she chopped, seasoned, and plated. Flavors came alive under her touch, each dish executed with pure passion and artistry. The crowd watched in awe. By the end, the room buzzed with nothing but praise. She's incredible. This food is unreal. There's no way she's a fraud. The journalists scribbled furiously, their headlines already taking shape. Daniel leaned back, satisfied. Told you. Sophia, utterly drained, collapsed into a chair with an exhausted sigh. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, Daniel laughed. But was it worth it? Sophia let a slow, proud smile spread across her face. Absolutely. After the live demonstration event, Sophia became a true sensation. Sophia de Sophia was constantly packed, the waitlist growing by the day. Food bloggers raved about her dishes and social media buzzed with praise for the rising culinary star. But Sophia knew better than to get comfortable. Success in the restaurant business was never just smooth sailing. This is moving too fast, Daniel. She stood in the kitchen, stirring the rich, fragrant yakisoba sauce as the staff hurried around, managing the flood of incoming orders. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. And isn't that a good thing? Sophia let out a slow sigh. It is, but I can't shake this feeling, like something bad is coming. Daniel chuckled, brushing off her concern. You're being paranoid. Sophia frowned. Maybe. But ever since that guy tried to sabotage the dinner, I haven't been able to relax. At that, Daniel's expression hardened. His usual lightheartedness faded. If there's someone working against us, I'll find out who it is. Sophia met his eyes, concern flickering in her gaze. Just be careful not to get too involved. Daniel smirked, his voice low and unwavering. Too late for that. That night, Daniel sought out an old ally, Elliot Lopez, a sharp-eyed private investigator with a reputation for uncovering the truth. They met in a dimly lit office, papers scattered across Elliot's desk. The scent of black coffee lingered in the air. Daniel wasted no time. I need information on who's trying to destroy the restaurant. Elliot leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with mild curiosity. And why are you so personally invested? For a brief second, Daniel hesitated. Then, his voice came firm and unwavering. Because it's affecting me too. A slow smirk played on Elliot's lips. Fair enough, I'll dig into it. 2 days later, the call came. Daniel, I found out who's behind this. Daniel answered instantly. Go ahead. Elliot's tone was sharp. It's Celeste. Daniel's grip on his phone tightened. Of course it's her. He should have known. Celeste never accepted defeat easily, and after her humiliation at the charity event, she was bound to retaliate. But then Elliot's voice grew graver, and now she has a bigger plan. A sinking feeling settled in Daniel's chest. What is she planning? There was a pause before Elliot finally said, She's trying to buy the restaurant. For a moment, Daniel didn't respond. Then, in a low murmur, he said exactly what he was thinking. She's lost her mind. Sophia was wiping down the kitchen counters, the rhythmic motion of the cloth against stainless steel helping her unwind after another hectic day. Then, Daniel walked in. His expression was unreadable, but Sophia had seen that look before. She sighed, setting the cloth aside. We need to talk is never good news. Daniel didn't waste time. Celeste is trying to buy the restaurant. Sophia froze. What? She wants to take you down, Daniel said, watching her carefully. And the best way to do that is by taking the restaurant away from you. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. Then, anger flared in Sophia's chest. She'll never succeed. Daniel's lips curled into a slow smile. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But deep down, he knew Celeste wasn't the type to walk away from a fight. The next morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at Sabotage Sophia. A man in a crisp suit stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking against the floor as he approached Sophia. Without preamble, he handed her a generous sum to purchase this restaurant. Sophia arched an eyebrow and scanned the numbers. Her jaw tightened. Is she kidding me? The man adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. No, miss, she believes this is a fair offer. Sophia didn't hesitate. She tore the contract in half. Then, for good measure, she tore it again. Tell her I'm not for sale. The man stood motionless for a beat, then bent down, gathered the torn pieces with careful precision, and without another word walked out. A moment later, Daniel strolled into the kitchen. What was that about? Sophia crossed her arms, her gaze still locked on the doorway. Celeste tried to buy me out. Daniel's lips curled into a knowing smile. And what did you do? Sophia lifted her chin, eyes glinting. What do you think? Daniel let out a low chuckle. You surprise me more every day. But Celeste wasn't finished. The next morning, a new headline sent shockwaves through the city. Sophia shut down due to sanitary violations. Sophia's heart plummeted. She stared at the words, willing them to disappear. This can't be real. Daniel grabbed the official document from the inspectors, his jaw tightening as he skimmed the details. It's a setup, he said coldly. Celeste must have bribed someone. Sophia clenched her fists. She's trying to destroy everything we built. Daniel exhaled slowly, his mind already working through their next move. If she wants a war, he met Sophia's gaze, determination blazing in his eyes. Then she'll get one. The next morning, Sophia and Daniel stormed into the health inspection office, determined to clear their name. A man in a gray suit, his expression unreadable, greeted them. Miss Sophia, Mr. Stone, I'm sorry to inform you, but Sabotage Sophia is closed until further notice. Sophia leaned over the desk, her anger barely contained. Based on what? The inspector calmly flipped through a report. Evidence of expired products, unsanitary kitchen conditions, and a pest infestation. Sophia's blood boiled. That's a lie! She slammed her hand on the table. Daniel, keeping his composure, said, We want to see the evidence. With a sigh, the inspector slid a stack of photos toward them. Sophia picked up the pictures and her stomach turned. Shelves lined with expired products, pots with grime residue, and worst of all, a cockroach in the pantry's corner. This can't be, she whispered. Daniel studied the images carefully. Then he smirked. These photos are fake. The inspector raised an eyebrow. And how can you be sure? Daniel tapped on one of the images. This brand of seasoning hasn't been sold in 2 years. A flicker of hesitation crossed the inspector's face. Sophia straightened, her voice sharp. This proves someone planted this evidence to frame us. The man sighed, closing the report. Regardless, the complaint has been filed. If you want to contest the decision, you'll need a new inspection. Sophia gritted her teeth. Fine, then do the new inspection now. The inspector shook his head. There's a process. The soonest we can conduct another inspection is 2 weeks from now. Sophia's heart dropped. 2 weeks? Daniel clenched his fists. This isn't a coincidence. Celeste is pulling the strings. A 2-week closure meant devastating financial losses, customers lost to competitors, and, worst of all, damage to their reputation that might never recover. Sophia's mind raced until a spark of an idea ignited. She turned to Daniel, a fire in her eyes. If we can't open the restaurant, then let's bring the restaurant to the customers. The next morning, Sophia and Daniel stood side by side in the kitchen prepping special takeout meals. If people can't come to us, we'll bring the food to them, Sophia declared, tying her apron, and Daniel smirked. Now that's the kind of thinking I like. They wasted no time rallying the entire restaurant team. Within hours, an improvised yet efficient delivery system was in place. Let's spread the word, Sophia said, grabbing her phone. Daniel was already ahead of her, fingers flying over his screen. A few moments later, the post went live. Labor de Sophia may be closed, but our food still comes to you. Order now and enjoy homemade flavors wherever you are. The internet exploded, comments poured in, support flooded their inbox, and orders started rolling in at an unbelievable pace. Sophia bit her lip. Do you really think this will work? Daniel shot her a confident look. Do you doubt me? Always, he chuckled. Then get ready to be surprised. And just like that, it worked. Within hours, the kitchen transformed into a whirlwind of movement. Orders piled up, ingredients disappeared in record time, and the entire team moved in sync like a well-oiled machine. "We're completely overwhelmed," one of the employees shouted, wiping sweat from their forehead. Sophia, breathless but grinning, tossed a dish into a takeout bag. "Is that a problem or a solution?" The kitchen erupted in laughter. Amid the chaos, one thing was clear: the plan was working, but Celeste wasn't done. That same night, a fresh headline dominated the news. "Closed restaurant continues to operate illegally." Sophia stared at her phone, her fingers tightening around it. This woman has no limits. Before she could react, Daniel snatched the phone from her hands, scanning the article with narrowed eyes. "Enough, I'm handling this." He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Elliot, I need answers." The private investigator picked up almost immediately. "I figured you'd call. Celeste knew about our deliveries before we even announced them. Someone's feeding her information." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Find out who." Sophia crossed her arms, her mind racing. "She has an infiltrator." Daniel nodded, his expression dark. "And we're going to find out exactly who it is." The betrayal was uncovered at dawn. One of the restaurant employees was caught red-handed, snapping secret photos from the corner of the kitchen. Sophia stormed forward, her voice sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" The man stiffened, fumbling to hide his phone. Before he could react, Daniel snatched the device from his grip. A quick scroll through the messages revealed everything. Texts exchanged with Celeste, instructions, updates on their every move. Daniel smirked. "Gotcha." The employee's face drained of color. He turned, ready to bolt, but Daniel blocked his path. His tone was cold. "You can talk to us, or you can talk to the police." The man hesitated, then finally cracked. "Celeste paid me to spy. She wanted to know your next move and sabotage you before you had a chance to act." Sophia exhaled sharply, clenching her fists to steady the fury boiling inside her. Daniel's expression darkened. "Get your things. You're done here." The man scurried away, disappearing out the door. Sophia turned to Daniel. "This means Celeste already knows we're fighting back." Daniel nodded, his eyes gleaming with something dangerous. "Good. Now it's our turn to hit back." Without another word, he pulled out his phone and dialed. "Elliot, I need a favor," the investigator answered smoothly. "What do you have in mind?" Daniel's lips curled into a slow smile. "It's time to expose Celeste." The takedown was swift. By morning, a new article exploded across the internet. "Businesswoman exposed in sabotage scandal against rival restaurant." The report laid everything bare. Leaked messages, shady bank transactions, bribes, undeniable proof that Celeste had orchestrated the entire attack against Sabotage Sophia. She had played a dangerous game, and now she had lost. By late afternoon, Sophia and Daniel were summoned to a meeting with the regulatory agency. The inspector sat across from them, tapping a folder against the desk. Then, with a small smile, he said, "With this new evidence, Sabotage Sophia will be reopened immediately." Sophia's breath caught. "Really?" He nodded. "Really?" Sophia turned to Daniel, her emotions overflowing, and without thinking she threw her arms around him. For a second, Daniel stiffened in surprise. Then, just as quickly, he wrapped her in a tight embrace. "We did it." That night, the restaurant's doors reopened, and outside a line of customers stretched down the block. Sophia stood at the entrance, taking it all in. The warm glow of the restaurant lights, the excited chatter of customers, the scent of fresh dishes drifting into the night air. They had survived. She exhaled, a small smile tugging at her lips. "This is unbelievable." Daniel slid his hands into his pockets, his gaze steady on her. "No, this is the result of your work." Sophia turned to him. He turned to her. For a moment, the world around them faded. Then Sophia let out a soft, nervous laugh. "If you think this means you get to eat for free, you're wrong." Daniel laughed. "You really are impossible." But as he looked at her, he knew he was completely, irrevocably smitten. A triumphant return. The reopening of Sabotage Sophia was nothing short of a sensation. On the early hours of the morning, a crowd gathered, stretching down the sidewalk, loyal customers, curious newcomers, all eager to taste the dishes that had become the talk of the town. Inside the kitchen, Sophia worked with her signature precision, directing the team effortlessly. But this time, there was something different. For the first time in weeks, she felt in control again. And it felt good. Let's have some fun. Meanwhile, from across the restaurant, Daniel stood watching the scene unfold. His expression? Unreadable. One of the cooks nudged his colleague. "He's acting weird," another chuckled. "Maybe he's in love with the boss." Or maybe, a third voice chimed in, "he's planning something." They weren't wrong, because Daniel was planning something, a different kind of proposal. That night, once the last customer had left and the staff had wrapped up their work, Daniel waited. He found Sophia in the kitchen, wiping down a counter. She heard him before she saw him. "I need to talk to you." Sophia glanced over her shoulder, raising an eyebrow. "If this is about a new investment, can I decline now or later?" Daniel chuckled, crossing his arms. "For once, this isn't about business." She dried her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter, intrigued. "Then what is it about?" Daniel hesitated. A rare sight. Then, with quiet determination, he said, "I want to take you out to dinner." Sophia blinked. "Dinner? As in, outside the restaurant?" "Yes." She tilted her head, suspicious. "You've never invited me to dinner before." Daniel smirked. "There's always a first time." Sophia studied him, searching for the angle. Because Daniel Stone always had a strategy, but this time something was different. There was no game, no deal, just a question, a choice. And so, against all expectations, Sophia took a deep breath and said, "Okay." More than just dinner. The restaurant they chose was one of the most luxurious in the city, a place where chandeliers dripped with crystal and conversations were murmured over candlelit tables. Sophia scanned the room, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. "I feel like I'm being analyzed." Daniel smirked, swirling his wine. "You are, but just ignore it." She rolled her eyes. "Easy for you to say. You were born in this world." He leaned forward slightly. "And where would you rather be?" Sophia thought for a moment, then smiled. "Somewhere I can be myself, where no one cares if my clothes are dusted with flour or if my hands smell like spices." Daniel went quiet for a beat, watching her. "You know, I like that about you." Sophia blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "You don't try to fit in. You're not afraid to be exactly who you are." She let out a nervous laugh. "If that was a compliment, I'm taking note. They don't happen often." Daniel chuckled, lifting his glass. "Then you should take more notes, because I have plenty more to give you." Sophia's heart did something strange. Why was he saying things like this? And more importantly, why did it make her feel things she wasn't ready to admit? She shouldn't feel this way. This was just dinner. But as the night went on, conversation flowed effortlessly, as if the world outside didn't exist, as if nothing else mattered but this moment. And then, reality crashed back in, spotlight and scandal. As they stepped out of the restaurant, Sophia barely had time to register the flashing lights before the voices hit her. "Mr. Stone, is Miss Sophia your new girlfriend? Was this a romantic date? Does this mean you're no longer interested in high society women?" Sophia froze. Daniel, however, barely flinched. His expression turned cold, his easy charm replaced with something sharper. Without hesitation, he placed a firm hand on her waist, guiding her swiftly toward the car. Ignore them. But how could she? The cameras, the microphones, the relentless questions. They weren't just a successful restaurant anymore. They were the center of attention in the entire city, and now there was no turning back. Medlines and heartbeats. The next morning, the internet exploded. CEO Daniel Stone, caught on romantic dinner with village girl. Sophia nearly had a panic attack when she saw it. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, messages flooding in from clients, friends, and even complete strangers. Is this true? Are you two dating? Since when? She threw her phone onto the table, pressing her hands against her face. This is a nightmare. And then her phone rang again. Without thinking, she answered. Hello? Her heart sank at the familiar voice. Sophia. Grandma. Sophia shut her eyes. Of course she had seen it. Grandma, I can explain. Are you seeing that man? No, I mean yes, but not in the way they're saying. Then what way is it? Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because, really, what way was it? And before she could even process an answer, there was a knock at the door. She turned, and there stood Daniel. Sophia felt her stomach drop. A day was about to get even worse. A truth too scary to face. Daniel crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "Did you see the news?" Sophia let out a sharp sigh. "Of course I saw it. My phone won't stop buzzing. My grandma is about to strangle me." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm sorry." Her frustration boiled over. "Sorry? This is ruining my reputation." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Your reputation, or your heart?" Sophia froze. "What?" He stepped closer, his voice calm but certain. "Because I think you're more scared of what you're feeling than what other people will think." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Daniel took another step. "I like you, Sophia." His tone was steady, deliberate. "And I think you like me too." The world around her seemed to tilt. "Daniel," he held up a hand. "You don't have to answer now, just think about it." But that was the problem. Thinking about it was exactly what she was afraid to do. Sleepless confessions. That night she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, stared at the ceiling, tried to drown out the chaos in her mind. But nothing helped. She was lost. And worse, maybe she was in love. No matter how hard she tried to shove the thoughts away, Daniel was there. Every word he said, every look he gave her, every moment he made her feel like she mattered. She wanted to believe it was just a game, but it wasn't. It was real, and the worst part, she liked it. But admitting that out loud, that was terrifying, unfinished business. The next morning, Sophia made a decision. She arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, determined to drown out the thoughts swirling in her head. If she stayed busy, she wouldn't have time to think about Daniel Stone, or his words, or his relentless, knowing gaze. But fate had other plans. The moment she stepped into the kitchen, she spotted it, a white envelope resting on the counter. Her name was scrawled across the front in familiar handwriting. Sophia's breath hitched. With her pulse pounding, she picked it up and slowly tore it open. Inside was a single note. And just like that, her carefully constructed plan to avoid Daniel shattered. The invitation. "Don't run away. We need to talk. I'll be waiting for you at the Majestic Royale Hotel at 7 p.m. Daniel. Sophia's fingers tightened around the note. Her stomach flipped. He wanted to talk, but about what? And more importantly, should she go? The day slipped through her fingers faster than she expected. Before she knew it, the sky had darkened, the clock inching closer to 7. Now, she stood in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection. Indecision clawed at her. One part of her wanted to rip up the note, pretend she never saw it, and stay right where she was. The other part, the part she didn't want to admit, was stronger. Already knew she was going, no matter what. A risk worth taking. At exactly 7 p.m., Sophia stepped into the Majestic Royal Hotel. The grand chandeliers cast a golden glow over the lavish hall, the air humming with soft piano music and quiet conversations. She felt slightly out of place among the polished elegance, but she pushed the feeling aside. Then she saw him. Daniel stood near a reserved table, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression unreadable, serious yet kind. She inhaled deeply before walking toward him. "You came." She crossed her arms. "I still haven't decided if that was a mistake." A faint smile played on his lips. "Then sit down and find out." She rolled her eyes but took the seat across from him. A waiter arrived, pouring 2 glasses of deep red wine. Sophia studied Daniel. Something about him was different. The ever-composed, confident businessman looked tense. That was rare. "What's wrong?" she asked. He swirled the wine in his glass before speaking. "I want to make you an offer." Her eyes narrowed. "If this is another business proposition, I want you to be with me." The world stopped. Sophia's breath caught. She blinked, convinced she had misheard. "What?" Daniel's gaze met hers, unwavering. "I like you, Sophia, and I don't want to pretend I don't." Her heart skipped a beat. "Daniel, this doesn't make sense." "It makes all the sense in the world." His voice was steady, but there was a rare vulnerability in his eyes. In this world, you affect me in a way no one else ever has. I don't care where you come from, I don't care what people say. The only thing that matters is what we have." She swallowed hard. Her mind screamed no, but her heart, "I'm not like the women you know," she whispered. "I don't know how to live in your world." Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand. "I don't want you to change." His fingers tightened gently around hers. "I want you just the way you are." Her throat burned with unshed emotions. "You can't promise that." "Then give me a chance to prove it." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything left unsaid. The world outside faded, leaving only them. And then, without thinking, she reached for him, cupping his face, closing the distance. Their lips met in a kiss that was slow, deep, and filled with everything they had both been too afraid to say. And in that moment, everything made sense, a love that defied the odds. The following days were a whirlwind. The news of Daniel Stone and Sofia Rivera being together exploded across the media. Speculations ran wild. Gossip columns dissected every detail. Some people were thrilled, calling it a modern fairy tale. Others scoffed, waiting for it to fall apart. And none of it mattered because they were happy. And when Sofia finally let herself breathe, let herself truly feel, she realized she had never been this happy in her entire life. Months later, the restaurant had closed for the night. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, painting the evening with a quiet romance. Daniel had planned this dinner carefully, every detail meticulously chosen. The candlelight, the music, the way his fingers brushed hers across the table. Sofia noticed everything, but she didn't see it coming. Not until the clock struck midnight, and Daniel pushed back his chair, not until he got down on one knee, a velvet box resting in his palm. Her breath hitched. "Marry me." Her heart nearly jumped out of her chest. "What?" Daniel's smile was soft yet filled with certainty. "I know this was never in your plans. I know marriage wasn't something you ever imagined for yourself. But I also know," he exhaled, "I can't imagine my life without you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Daniel, I love you, Sofia, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." She laughed and cried at the same time, her emotions a beautiful, overwhelming mess. And then, she said the words that would change everything. Yes. As soon as the word left her lips, Daniel slid the ring onto her finger, pulling her into his arms. The world around them faded, because in this moment, nothing else mattered. A wedding unlike any other. The wedding was a breathtaking, unexpected affair, not the grand, extravagant ceremony of high society, but something far more meaningful. Daniel wanted a wedding that truly reflected them, not the world they had come from. So they chose the village where Sofia grew up, holding the ceremony in the garden of her grandmother's house. There were no crystal chandeliers or towering floral arrangements, just simple white blossoms, delicate fairy lights strung through the tree, and tables overflowing with homemade dishes prepared by the community. Sofia wore a delicate lace dress, not extravagant, yet when she walked through the garden she looked like a princess. Her hair was left loose, soft waves cascading down her shoulders, adorned with tiny wildflowers woven into the strands. Daniel, always polished, wore a perfectly tailored suit, but without all the stiff formalities. Because today wasn't about status or wealth, it was about love, a celebration of love. The entire village gathered to witness the moment. Sofia's grandmother cried as if she had been waiting for this day her whole life. The guests clapped, cheered, and wiped away tears as Daniel and Sofia said, "I do." There were no over-the-top gestures, no media frenzy, just pure, undeniable love, belonging. As the night unfolded, Sofia noticed something unexpected. Daniel, the CEO, the city's untouchable businessman, was completely at ease. He wasn't standing stiffly in a corner or checking his phone. He was laughing with the locals, shaking hands, listening to stories as if they were his own. And then, he did something that made her heart swell. He sat at a table, plate full of yakisoba, the very dish she had prepared that morning, and took a bite with genuine delight. He wasn't just visiting her world, he was becoming part of it. Sofia watched him, warmth spreading through her chest. She had never imagined her life would lead her here. But as she looked at Daniel, sitting in the heart of the village she called home, She realized something: he belonged here just as much as she did, and perhaps he always had. Then, just before the guests showered them with rice, Daniel gently took Sophia's hand and leaned in close, his voice a hushed whisper meant only for her. "Now, you're officially mine, forever." Sophia's lips curled into a playful smile. "I hope you can handle spending the rest of your life with a stubborn cook," Daniel chuckled, his eyes filled with nothing but love. Then, without hesitation, he pulled her into another kiss, one that spoke of promises, of forever, and of a love that neither time nor circumstance could ever shake. And just like that, Sophia and Daniel proved that love isn't about status or background. It's about finding someone who sees you for who you truly are. Their journey wasn't easy, but in the end they built something real, something worth fighting for. Now, tell us in the comments, do you believe love can overcome any obstacle? And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another one. See you in the next video.